Hello everyone. This is the second part of my Bloodborne 10-year anniversary celebration miniseries. In this part, we're going to be going over my favorite aspects of the game, so the things that I really like about it. If you want to see the first part, where I went over my personal history with the game from the time I learned about it all the way through what I'm doing with it now, the link's down below for you. Anyway, I don't want to stall for any longer than I have to. We've still got a lot to talk about here. Let's get going. So now that I've gone over my history of playing through the game, platinuming it and all that, I wanted to talk more about the things that I really love about the game, what really keeps me coming back to it, and honestly, what makes it my favorite game of all time. I went through and kind of ranked out, to an extent, my favorite aspects, and made kind of a top 7 list. But that's not to say that the ones that I talk about first are not as good or anything like that. The fact is, I think this game is the closest thing to perfect to ever exist. At least for me personally. But some things are, in my opinion, just a little bit better than others. Also, keep in mind, these are just my personal opinions. I'm not saying that any of these are objectively the best, or that I'm the all-knowing and what I say is law. This is just what I personally like the most. So, on that note, my first point is the gameplay itself. So many FromSoftware fans will argue that their personal favorite game is the best gameplay-wise for however many reasons. And while I'm not trying to argue or peer pressure anybody into agreeing with me, this is just why I personally believe that Bloodborne is better. To give just a brief recap, before trying Bloodborne, I had tried Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1. After playing Bloodborne, I tried Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 1 again, Demon Souls again, and Elden Ring. So from the first time I ever touched a FromSoft game all the way through now, the only 2 games of theirs that I have not tried are Dark Souls 2 and Sekiro. And with all of this, I still say, for me personally, Bloodborne is hands down the best. The first reason for that is because Bloodborne is a much faster-paced game. Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 were honestly just too slow and clunky for me, as I mentioned in my first section of this miniseries. And even with the amount of time that I put into it, as small as it could be seen by other more experienced players, I felt like I was getting absolutely nowhere in either of those games. I felt like I was putting in effort and really trying, but I was not taking out any sort of result. I was not making progress. And that was not something that I liked at all. It felt very unfulfilling to me. Bloodborne, on the other hand, while it did take a while for me to really click and figure out what I needed to do, it felt different. I felt like I was getting somewhere. I felt like I was making progress and not just treading water. And that led to it feeling much more fulfilling and exciting to me. But I've already been over all of that. Another reason, and honestly, one of the biggest selling points of the game for me was the fact that it doesn't make you depend on a shield, like Dark Souls seems to. In fact, Bloodborne outright tries to deter you from using shields by describing them as essentially worthless. I mean, the item description for the wooden shield, the only shield that you can get in the main game itself, says, quote, "A crude wooden shield used by the masses who have arisen to join the hunt. Hunters do not normally employ shields, ineffectual against the strength of the beasts as they tend to be. Shields are nice, but not if they engender passivity." It outright says that it's not going to be effective in the game, and was genuinely put in, I'm pretty sure, as some kind of a joke. It feels like whoever decided to incorporate the shields in was saying, yeah, sure, here's a plank of wood, you pansy, and then proceeded to intentionally make it do absolutely nothing. all to make you feel like somewhat of an idiot. No, Bloodborne's whole selling point was not relying on a shield, like most of the other games like this one, FromSoft made or not, but instead giving you a sword and a gun. This game wanted you to be aggressive. In fact, they demanded it. And in my opinion, at least early on in the experience, that is one of the best points of the game. The third reason for me is that the gameplay is the perfect blend between linear story progression and optional branching paths. This may be an unpopular opinion, but I've personally never been a fan of open world games. They really just don't work well for me. I end up getting lost, like truly lost, and having no idea where to go or what to do. I know that I'm very much in the minority for that, and that's fine. I'm fine with that, but that's just where I stand with it. Honestly, that's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why I'm not a fan of Elden Ring. But I don't want to start a fight here, so I'm not going to go into that. Back to the point. I love that Bloodborne puts you somewhere where you have no idea where you are or where to go, but as you start to just inch forward, slow as it may be, you start to pick up on things. You start to notice beaten trails off to the side, or areas that you didn't see before, and you start to pick up on landmarks. And you explore a little bit and end up at the boss arena. And for me personally, this is a good feeling, an accomplishment, because it's clean-cut affirmation that you got where you needed to go. And as the game progresses, you can also get a good feel, or at least I could get a good feel, when you were really getting close to the end of it. And as I mentioned, there are also the optional areas like Hemwick Charnel Lane or Hypogean Jail. Places that you don't have to go, but you can if you want to. And they add to the story and give you just that little extra bit of content and challenge if you don't have the DLC or if you haven't gotten to the Chalice dungeons yet. And that leads to my next point. I feel that Bloodborne is very really nearly the perfect length for a game like this. Another friend of mine named Tyler, not the one I met in college who told me about the game, another friend who I met on Reddit. Anyway, he and I talked one time about his philosophy in the way of games and their hour-to-cost ratio. And what he told me, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is that for every dollar that you spend on a game, you should get at least 1 hour of gameplay out of it. So, for example, I paid $60 for Bloodborne collectively. That was $40 for the game, $20 for the DLC. Using this ratio, that implies that for the game to be worth its purchase, I should be able to put a minimum of 60 hours into it. Now, suffice it to say, I've put way more than that into Bloodborne, but that in and of itself was my own choice. I could have played through the game until I got the Platinum Trophy and then put it down, never to touch it again, but even if I had done that, the amount of time that Former and I put into the game before beating it far exceeded the 60-hour minimum. I tried to look to see if I could find exactly how many hours were put in at the time of obtaining the Platinum Trophy. Sadly, I couldn't find any way to look back and see that. I would have if I could have. But please just trust me, take my word for it. I know for a fact it was well over 100 hours. It had to be. But this to me actually feels like the perfect amount of time for a game like this to take. It's not too few to where I don't feel like I got my money's worth from the game, but it's not too many to where I feel like the game is unrealistic in what it expects from you. Now, fairness where it's due, the situation is a little bit different now. By which I mean that I know Yharnam better than I know the city I live in. So nowadays, I can beat the game from start to end in a small handful of hours, especially if it's a New Game Plus cycle where I can just bum rush the bosses and don't have to go through everything. But at this point, with all the hours I've clocked in this game already, that doesn't even matter. Though to be fair, at the same time, I would be lying if I said that I didn't wish there could be just a tiny bit more to the game. But to be fair, that's because of how much I love this game. When I play Bloodborne, of course I don't want it to end. I love it that much to where I don't want it to stop. But I know that nothing can last forever, and I just have to accept that it has to end somewhere. And besides, there's always another playthrough or a new route dungeon I can do. My next point is that I feel, personally, of all the FromSoftware games I've tried, Bloodborne has the most satisfying parries and visceral attacks. I don't even know what to say here, really. It's just a matter of personal preference, and I understand that. But there's just something so glorious to me about shooting the enemy, having them fall to their knee with just that wonderful parry sound that it makes, running up to them, forcing your hand through their abdomen, and pulling out a giant splash of blood that just goes all over the place. I don't know what else to say here. It feels good to me. Now, there is one other thing that I feel I need to talk about in the way of the gameplay aspect, and of course, as I'm sure you can predict, that's the bosses. After all, they're more or less intended to be the focal point of the game, so how can I not talk about them? I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I feel that this subject in particular is kind of a little overdone. Though, fairness where it's due, I can understand why it's discussed as much as it is. Like I said, it's pretty much the game's focal point, and I do feel obligated to give at least a little bit of love to my favorite bosses here, so I'm just gonna name off a few of them. Bloodstarved Beast would probably have to be my third favorite. I love how she kind of throws you for a loop when you first start playing the game, with just how fast and erratic she is compared to other bosses you've seen at that point. I know that Father Gascoigne is technically widely considered to be the first skill check, but personally I would go so far as to say that I think that title should really go to Bloodstarved Beast. She's just so fast, and you're not used to that yet in the game. You meet other things later on that are like that too, possibly even more so, but when you're first starting out, no, she is the one who's gonna throw you off, and she is the one that you're gonna need to keep going back to at least a few times. I guess I could have also put Dark Beast Parl as my third favorite instead, or better yet, Loran Dark Beast from the Chalice dungeons, but I don't know. I just feel like Bloodstarved Beast stands out a bit more to me. My second favorite boss in the game would have to go to, believe it or not, the Orphan of Cause. Now, we can argue about whether Orphan of Cause or Lawrence the First Vicar are technically the harder fight. I personally feel that it depends almost entirely on whether you're playing New Game or New Game Plus, but I will say this. In my humble opinion, harder or not, Orphan of Cause is the better fight. You can love him, you can hate him, but no matter how you feel about him, you have to agree that the Orphan's fight deserves respect. In my experience, Lawrence's fight gets almost to a point where it's outright unfair as you continue through the New Game Plus cycles. His slam attack especially stands out to me as a bit broken, to put it nicely, given that you pretty much have almost no chance to dodge it unless you're completely out of his range, just because of how accurately it homes in on you. I also feel that his triple sweep attack in first stage and his magma spewing attacks in second stage are a bit unfair too, just because they're pretty much guaranteed one-taps. The Orphan, at least, still goes with the hard but fair philosophy that Miyazaki seems to strive for in his games. Also, I know that I've talked about this aspect in my history section, but I want to go over it again. I really appreciate what they did with the Orphan's AI. He was specifically programmed, to my understanding, to reassess the situation and change his tactics every 30 seconds, which I think is spectacular. I feel that it really adds to the fight and keeps it interesting without getting too ridiculous. And finally, my favorite boss fight in the game is a tie between Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower and Gehrman the First Hunter. Of all the fights in the game, these two are the first that come to my mind. They both have their own key aspects, and they are both just as special to me. Lady Maria's fight is, in my opinion, probably the smoothest in the game. It feels fluid, it feels very rhythmic, and it's almost like a dance in a way. Gehrman's fight, on the other hand, feels outright epic. A true end boss fight that you will remember for ages to come. Both of these fights feel very well constructed, tight, exciting. A lot of the boss fights in Bloodborne feel a little broken. Let me explain what I mean. Let's talk about Cleric Beast and Vicar Amelia for a second as an example. No disrespect to the fights, but you're struggling to beat them, get behind them and keep swinging. They'll eventually fall. You win. Amygdala and Abritus, get the bowblade, ping them in the face. They'll eventually fall. You win. Celestial Emissary and Witch of Hemwick, hit them a handful of times and dodge their ads. They'll eventually fall. You win. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not trying to say that the boss fights in Bloodborne are bad. I just feel that once you get the hang of them, they become a bit of a no-brainer. And I guess it could be argued that Lady Maria kind of falls into that as well, seeing as she is notoriously known as a parry magnet. But my thing with that is I specifically go out of my way not to use that to my advantage. I'm not trying to fault anyone who does that, because it's your game. You can do what you want with it. I personally just choose not to because I want to enjoy the fight. Either way, I feel like I'm just going on a tangent now. The bottom line is, Lady Maria and Gehrman are the boss fights that, to me, are the most fulfilling. And that's why they're my favorite boss fights in the game. So moving on from gameplay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the weapons. In my opinion, Bloodborne's weapons are the best to ever exist in any game, FromSoft or not. There are two main reasons why I say this. One, there are not too many weapons, and two, they are the most unique. So when I say there's not too many, here's what I mean. Looking at the other FromSoftware games, there are so many weapons that you can pick up along the way, that in my opinion, it's actually too many. For instance, the original Demon's Souls on PS3 had 78 weapons. The remake has 80. Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 all have over 100 weapons each. Elden Ring has 308. 308 weapons, and that does not even include the DLC. The only exception to this, from what I've gathered, is Sekiro, sitting at 3 main melee weapons, and then a prosthetic arm with 35 different possible attributes or attacks to it, clocking in at a total of 38 weapons. Meanwhile, Bloodborne has a total of 26 right-hand melee weapons, not including the lost or uncanny variants, and 16 left-hand weapons, totaling at 42 weapons altogether. Maybe this is just a me thing, but that's way easier for me to handle. In my observations of watching other people, mainly my friend Brad, play through other FromSoft games, I remember seeing how many weapons they had and just being outright overwhelmed by it. I feel like if I were playing the game, I would end up sitting there just staring at my inventory for about 20 minutes, just trying to decide what I want to use, and eventually I would get so frustrated with it that I would just turn the game off and not want to play it. In Bloodborne, I would scroll through the list for a few seconds, I would see what I want to use, and that was the end of it. Now, that's of course before I found my main setup, but that's a conversation for a different time. But at the same time, Bloodborne, for as small as its weapon variety may be, has the most interesting and unique weapons that I've ever seen in a video game. Ever. And sure, there are a few that are very similar, like, for example, the Saw Cleaver, Saw Spear, and Beast Hunter Scythe. Or, Ludwig's Holy Blade and the Holy Moonlight Sword could be considered pretty similar, I guess. But aside from those, the rest of the weapons are very different from one another. Again, going back to me watching other people play Dark Souls or Elden Ring, I would see the weapons, as many as there were, And I would think to myself, if I were playing this game, which one would I pick? Longsword, longsword with slightly different colors and stats, other longsword with slightly different colors and stats, other longsword with slightly different colors and stats, so on and so forth. For me personally, no disrespect intended, the other games are just kind of boring most of the time, with a few exceptions granted. And yeah, of course it could be argued that some of Bloodborne's weapons are a little on the less interesting side. For example, the hunter axe that turns into a one-handed battle axe to a two-handed battle axe. But let me ask you this. How many times have you seen a weird curved sword that can turn into a bow? Or a club that can turn into a giant round saw? Or a cane that suddenly becomes a spiked whip? And how many games have you played where you found a weapon that looks like some weird and awkward two-pronged spike, but if you have the right rune equipped, you can literally transform into a lycanthropic beast? Or let's go the complete opposite from that and say that you find this weird parasite that does absolutely fuck all when you first equip it, but the moment you activate a certain rune, you become this bizarre monstrosity that looks like it has a cauliflower for a head and slimy tentacles coming out of it. Whoever on FromSoft's team was put in charge of the weapons specifically must have just had a complete field day. I mean, they got so creative with it. And there are others that I didn't even mention here too, but I feel that I've said my piece, and it's time to move on. So next up on my list is the world design. Now, this may or may not come as a surprise to you, but I do not consider myself to be an avid gamer. I'm very selective in what I'm willing to invest my time into, especially nowadays that I'm an adult. But I've played several games in my time, and no other game that I've ever played even compares to the world design of Bloodborne for me. As I mentioned way earlier on in my last video, I have a deep love for the UK and Gothic aesthetics, and Bloodborne right out the gate takes both of those aspects and runs with them. Here's just a few of my favorite areas in the game. Central Yharnam, Cathedral Ward, and Old Yharnam all remind me a lot of old Victorian London, and that was initially my main selling point, particularly Central Yharnam. Castle Cainhurst, a close contender for my favorite part of the whole game, really captivated me with its direct inspiration from Bram Stoker's Dracula. But even more so than that, because of the beautiful snowy layout of it. I've always had a thing for snow levels in games. I just tend to think, assuming that they're done right, they can be some of the most beautiful areas to look at. Then there's Upper Cathedral Ward, which blew me away with its color scheme. It almost feels like I'm in some weird fever dream. And then, of course, there's the DLC, with the Hunter's Nightmare being a distorted reimagining of Central Yharnam and the Cathedral Ward. There's the Research Hall, with its abandoned hospital aesthetic and patients running loose completely out of their minds. And of course, there's the Fishing Hamlet, which takes Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth and truly breathes new life into it. And on top of that, there's the Chalice Dungeons. I'll be honest and say that the Thumeru and Hintertomb are probably, in my opinion, the least interesting parts of the game as a whole, mainly because they're reused too much. 7 out of 10 of the fixed dungeons use these designs, and 5 of those 7 are all the Thumeru. It just gets boring after a while, seeing the same color palette and similar layouts on repeat. But the Loran and the Iz dungeons, that's a completely different story. The Loran and Lower Loran dungeons are dark and menacing. They really make you feel on edge with the electrical currents on the ceiling and the black smoke drifting along the floor and distorting your view. And the Iz, I cannot sing the Iz dungeons enough praise when it comes to their design. The color palette with its blues and purples and hints of green mixed in almost put me in a hypnotic state. It feels cosmic. completely out of this world. And anytime I do an Is Root Chalice, I'll find myself just standing in certain rooms and looking around from time to time, just trying to take it all in as much as I do them. But there are other things that I love about the world design too. I loved that you could see certain areas in the world from other areas. For example, how you could see the Great Bridge in central Yarnum from the Cathedral Ward. Or how you could see Canehurst Castle in the distance from Hemwick Charnel Lane. Or Bergenworth College from the Forbidden Woods. And then there's also the masts that you can see in Nightmare Frontier that appear to come from the fishing hamlet. And then there's that awesome thing that they did with Hypogean Jail and Yahar Ghul. How Hypogean Jail was pretty much a part of the Unseen Village, but it was masked over by ROM to make it look like just a regular place, rather than the complete abomination of a village that it truly was. Now, I know that I haven't touched on everything here, but those are just some of my favorites. The truth is, I think that all of the game is beautiful in its own way. Yes, even the Thumeru and Hintertomb chalices, as much as I am genuinely sick of seeing them at this point. But there is one area that I definitely wanted to save for last, and that is the Hunter's Dream. Of all the areas that I've ever seen in a video game, any video game, this is the area that, to me, is the most iconic. The first time I saw it, I was awestruck. It's a small, simple area with not much going on, but I think that's one of the things that really attracted me to it. I was a bit in shock, if I'm going to be honest, because I went from getting just completely wrecked by the Scourge Beast to suddenly being here with no explanation whatsoever. And I was just shocked by how peaceful and beautiful it was. And as I kept going back to it throughout my gameplay, I started to feel like I was actually at home there. It's just, there's a sense of safety and comfort there, with the quiet music playing softly in the background. And don't worry, we'll come back to that later. The welcoming fireplace in the house, and of course, the doll and Gehrman offering friendly conversation. It was a sanctuary, a break from the chaos that the rest of the game has to offer. But even slightly more than the dream itself, my absolute favorite area is the Hunter's Dream Garden. Yes, the area where you face Gehrman at the end of the game. When I first went to that part of the Hunter's Dream, I stopped dead in my tracks for a minute. I couldn't find it in myself to move because I just wanted to stare at it. I wanted to absorb the beauty from it. The white flowers all across the ground, the endless graves, the giant tree, and Gehrman sitting at the top of the hill in wait. I was speechless. And even now, whenever I reach the end of a playthrough, I'll find myself just standing there for a few minutes to enjoy it. I can't help myself. In a similar vein to the world design is the game's atmosphere. Now, when I say atmosphere, I'm not talking about how it looks. I'm talking about how it feels. And Yarnum feels like a world that has fallen. A place that's in such a bad state that it is gasping for its last breaths. There's this sense of dread from the moment your story begins, and it only gets worse as you keep going. You feel lost, you feel helpless, and you feel alone. Then, when the game isn't making you feel sad, lonely, and helpless, it will instead make you feel absolutely terrified. Bloodborne is not technically listed as a horror game, but I can tell you that this game has scared me in ways far worse than horror games that I've played ever did. There was a deep, visceral reaction to a lot of what goes on in Yarnum, especially when I first started playing the game. I didn't want to walk past an alleyway, or walk around a corner, or go to the next area, or grab that item that was guarded by several enemies. And it wasn't because I didn't want to play the game, I very much so did. It was because I was sitting there on my couch, trembling at the thought of what was to come. This game, at least in my experience, really sucks you into it. And I genuinely felt like I was in legitimate danger playing through it. I felt like my heart was going to stop several times throughout, which is actually really interesting to think about because I'm not really affected by jump scares. At least, not anymore. I used to be, but my favorite YouTuber of all time, the person who I mentioned in the first part of this, actually greatly desensitized me to jump scares as a whole. But that's a conversation for a different time. When you combine these two aspects of the game, I feel that you truly start to grasp the magic that Bloodborne has to offer. In the game itself, I feel that these are what can really initially draw you in and get you hooked on it, making you feel a need to keep coming back. Now we are getting into my top 3 favorite aspects of the game, and number 3 is the soundtrack. As anyone who knows me is aware, I am a musician, and as a musician, I cannot help but talk about this aspect. It would be wrong for me not to. Bloodborne's soundtrack is, in a word, exceptional. I've heard a lot of great soundtracks from games, with just a few off the top of my head that stand out being Astro Bot, God of War Ragnarok, and Red Dead Redemption 2 as being some of the best. And of course, other FromSoft games have wonderful soundtracks as well. There's no denying that. Cue in the plin plin plon comments. But to me, Bloodborne's is the best. I'm not going to pretend that I find every single song to be the best of the best of the best. There are several tracks that just don't really catch my attention, like the ones from the Chalice Dungeons, the One Reborn's theme, and a handful of others that just don't stand out to me, personally. I'm not by any means saying that they're bad. They just don't do as much for me as some of the others. So, for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on my favorites. Let's start with The Hunter's Dream. I briefly mentioned it in the section about the world design, but I want to go a little more in depth with it. The song that plays when you first start the game in The Hunter's Dream is very soothing and quiet, just a nice calm sound to let you know that you're safe here. Then, as you continue on through the game, it shifts to a different song called Moonlit Melody. It's a more somber take on the dream, and it sets the mood for the rest of the game. It replaces the original song once you've killed Rom or gained a certain amount of insight, which I thought was a very nice touch. Next up, and probably the most obvious, at least for the main game, the Cleric Beast theme. It's probably one of the most iconic songs in the game, and probably one of the most recognized as well. It was used for both Cleric Beast herself and Vicar Amelia, and honestly I can't even complain that it was used twice. It's just that great of a song. Then there's Father Gascoigne's theme and Bloodstarved Beast's theme that were both, in my opinion, the first tracks that make you feel really anxious. They capture the feeling of the fight, which is very intense, and it feels fitting for the first 2 real skill checks in the game. Both of these songs definitely got my heart pumping. The next one I want to mention is Mikolash's theme, which is probably one of the most interesting. It really gives you a sense of Mikolash's absolute insanity, and I think it's one of the most in tune with the character songs on the soundtrack. Another favorite of mine is Abridus' theme. Abridus is not a boss to be scoffed at by any stretch of the imagination, and her song feels just as epic as her fight can be, assuming that you don't just ping her in the face with the bow blade. It honestly feels like the song of an entity, of a great one. Then there's one that I think may be one of the most unique songs in the game, and that is the Lullaby for Murgo. This song is hypnotic, as simple as it may be. It's astonishingly simple, but somehow it just works for the fight. In my opinion, it's another one of the most recognizable songs in the game. Then there's Ludwig's theme. Quite possibly even more recognizable and favored than the Cleric Beast's theme. It seems to me that this song is one of the most widely considered fan favorites. Hell, some people have outright said that it's the best song in the entire Soulsborne franchise. And I can't necessarily blame anyone for saying that. The song has this grand, majestic sound to it that really captures the weight of the character that you're going up against. And of course, we can't forget about the turning point in the song that plays during the mid-fight cutscene. Positively epic. Lady Maria's theme is another one. It's perfect for her fight in particular. As I mentioned earlier when talking about how her fight is one of my favorites in the game, it feels very much like a dance, and this song intensifies that about tenfold. I outright refuse, as I mentioned, to take advantage of how easy it is to parry her because of this. I feel almost like she and I are dancing a waltz as we fight, and it would just feel wrong to break that. Then there's my favorite song from the DLC specifically, and that's Lawrence's theme. I love the callback to the Cleric Beast theme that it holds, seeing as he was the first Cleric Beast. But then towards the end of the fight, it changes to just this beautifully dark chorus. The vocal melody of that later part of the song makes me tear up a little bit from time to time, just from how dark and sad and remorseful it sounds. Lawrence may be a boss, and for that matter a character in general, that I have a personal vendetta against. We'll cover that later. But his song will always be one of my favorites. In fact, it will always be a close second favorite. But of course that leads to my favorite song from the game. And anyone who knows me knows exactly which one I'm about to say. In my opinion, the best song in the entire game, main game, DLC, Chalice Dungeons, doesn't matter, is Gehrman's theme. So let's take a trip back to my last video real quick, specifically where I talked about the first attempt that I made in Gehrman's boss fight. I mentioned that I very quickly lost my first attempt. There's a reason for that. And no, it's not just because Gehrman is truly a force to be reckoned with. The true reason why I died during that fight is because I was so captivated by the song that was playing that I stopped moving. I stopped dead in my tracks and just got absorbed by the song that was playing. I'm serious. I forgot for a minute that I was playing a game and was in a boss fight. And I'm going to be honest, the song was making me a bit emotional. It still does to this day sometimes. Lawrence's theme might make me tear up a little bit from time to time, but Gehrman's theme can sometimes make me outright cry. Maybe not to the point of sobbing, but even after all these years, I'll have tears running down my face. The orchestral melody has this mournful sound, melancholic and haunting. And then there's the chorus later on, a completely different thing altogether. I've always interpreted the lyrics from the semi-rough translations that I've found online to be him talking about how he needs to free you, the player, from the dream. How he can't let you get trapped in it like he did. And knowing that you are trying to free him from it as well, to end his suffering, it tells me the true point of the fight and the song alike is that two friends are trying to save each other. That, to me, is soul-crushingly beautiful. And that is why Gehrman's theme is indisputably my favorite song from the entire game. So for these last two sections, I want to preface by saying that it was a very hard choice deciding which one I wanted to put in second place and in first place. These are both, in my opinion, absolutely and indisputably the best parts of the game, and in reality, they're essentially tied for first place. But like I said earlier, I need to put them in some sort of order. So I had to make a choice. Should I put the fan favorite in the number one spot, where almost everybody and their cousins will agree that it's objectively the best part of the game, or do I want to save that spot for my own personal favorite instead? And after giving it much thought, I've decided to go with the latter. So number 2 on the list is going to be that fan favorite that I mentioned, the lore. Now, I don't want to come across as some sort of a tease, so I'm just going to outright say it. I'm not going to go into a deep dive of the lore here. The fact of the matter is, if I did try to start talking about the lore of Bloodborne, we would be here in this video for hours, if not days. There are so many videos out there already talking about the supposed deep dive lore and all of the different theories and using in-game dialogue and item descriptions and all that, just trying to bring everything together as the final canonically true story. And I don't even want to pretend that I could go so far as to barely scratch the surface on just covering all of that that's already been said, let alone adding to it. So I'm sorry to anyone in particular who was looking forward to this topic. I really am. But what I'm going to do instead of actually diving into it is to just briefly state this. Bloodborne's lore is objectively its strongest feature. If you are anything like me, the gameplay or the aesthetic was what brought you into the game, but once that lost its luster, you stayed here for the secrets hidden within the story itself. This game, if any of the theories that I've heard or have hypothesized myself hold any truth to what Miyazaki had in mind for it, has so many dark parts to it that it will haunt you for a very, very long time. There have been numerous nights where Brad and I were on the phone for hours on end just talking about certain aspects of the game, comparing theories that we have about certain places, events, and characters. And with some of those talks actually, let's just say, making us a bit emotional with some certain matters. And I think that's one of the true beauties of this game, just how complex the lore can turn out to be, whether it's canonically true or just headcanon. In my opinion, it adds so much to the game, just thinking of all the possible what-ifs. And there's even one theory in particular that Brad and I discussed at one point involving a few specific characters that affected me so much I'm willing to die on the hill of it being true, even if it is just a headcanon. But I'll come back to that later. For now, let me put this subject to bed and move on before I turn into a complete conspiracy theorist, because trust me, nobody wants that. So here we are. We're finally at what I consider to be my number one part of the whole game, the characters. I want to start this final stretch by saying that I will not be talking about every single character here. I feel that this video has already well exceeded what I had expected time-wise, and I already have so much to talk about with just the handful of characters that I really feel a stronger connection with. So some of the characters, I'm sorry to say, are just going to have to be left out of this one. I'm sure that a lot of people would vehemently disagree with me. In fact, there may be some strong words in the comments from certain people, even about some of the characters that I do talk about here. But I will say this. I don't mean any disrespect to any of these characters who I don't talk about. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying the writing was bad. I'm not saying the voice acting was bad. I'm not saying anything like that about any of them. They just weren't as impactful to me personally. I also want to mention that while I am going to try to hold to my word at least a little bit about not going into a complete deep dive of the game's lore, there are a few things that I'm going to have to mention lore-wise about these characters. The characters in Bloodborne are primarily driven by lore in the end. So I feel there's no real way to avoid talking about it while still being able to express what I want to say about them. So, sorry to be a bit of a hypocrite. I'm sure I'm making a complete ass out of myself here, but this is really the best I can do. I'll try to keep it to a minimum as best I can. So before we start, I want to backtrack to the very first thing I talked about in the first video. How I have a tendency to fixate on things. That tendency can also apply to characters in stories, be it games, be it shows, movies, books, anything with a story. Like I said, I don't know exactly what causes it. I'm sure there's a plethora of possibilities, but there are some times when it can get a little bit difficult. From time to time, I find myself sort of forgetting that characters are fictional, I'll find myself thinking that they're a real person. I guess looking at it with a glass half full optimism, it could be considered a compliment to whoever created the character in question. It does take talent, I feel, to put so much life into a made-up character that someone can feel attached to them on that kind of a level. But I guess in the end, I could just chalk it up as a character flaw on my part. Either way, the reason I'm mentioning this beforehand is because as we go down the list, this quirk of mine is going to become very apparent, and I just want to be clear that it's not something that I'm unaware of myself. I am very much aware of it, so I guess consider this me calling myself out. But back to the point. I know I said a minute ago that I don't mean any disrespect to the characters that I'm not talking about in this section, but there are a couple of characters in particular who I will fully admit I do mean disrespect to the point where I feel like I need to talk about it. So those two characters in particular will be discussed in this section, the dishonorable mentions. The first dishonorable mention goes to Lawrence, the first vicar, and the founder of the Healing Church. I will be the first to acknowledge that in the beginning his heart was in the right place, going by the lore. He wanted to bring an end to the Scourge, and he felt that Master Willem's ideals had grown to be obsolete and ineffective. However, he went way too far. And in my opinion, there does come a point where you can do so much harm to the world around you, even if your intentions were good at first, that you reach a level of irredeemability. And I feel that Lawrence reached that point all because he gave in to the bloodlust. Lawrence is a prime example to me of how power corrupts without exception. And while he did, in a sense, get what was coming to him by being turned into one of the most horrendous beasts in all of Yharnam, I still personally do not know if I feel that that's enough to make up for all the wrongs that he did that he can never take back. The other dishonorable mention, even more so than Lawrence, is Mikolash. There are characters in this game who I feel a certain amount of disdain towards. Yosefka's imposter, Sister Adela, and the skeptical man from Cathedral Ward, just to name a few. But they are complete and utter darlings compared to Mikolash. Mikolash, to me, is the most evil creature in this entire game, a close contender to being the most evil creature in the entire Soulsborne franchise. And he brings new meaning and life to the concept of some people just wanting to watch the world burn. He is at least a substantial part of why the nightmare has gotten as bad as it is, and he outright revels in it. When people talk to me about the D&D character alignments, Mikolash is the first character who I think of for chaotic evil. Not just in Bloodborne, not even in FromSoft games, but of literally anything. He is a complete rat bastard, a stain, a malignant fucking tumor in the world of Bloodborne, and I will proudly say that I take great joy in destroying him any chance I get, and especially when I can do so with as much disrespect as I can using the cheese method that I mentioned in the last video using the bow blade. Yes, I cheese Mikolash all the time at this point. I know in my first playthrough I beat him legitimately, but that's in the past. I want to add insult to injury when I fight him, and no, I'm not sorry about it. I have no regrets. And before anyone tries to twist it around and say that it's a cop-out because I can't actually fight him legit, that is not true. I can take him out legitimately. I have when helping other people who did not want to cheese him. And I am confident enough in my skills in the game now to know that if I really wanted to, I could beat him legitimately in my own playthroughs. But the fact is, I don't fucking want to. It's not a skill issue. It is that I feel that he is not worthy of an honorable fight. And yes, I will die on that hill. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, fuck Mikolash. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I want to move on to my honorable mentions. These are the characters who I do really like, or at least feel really bad for or find incredibly interesting. But they're just not quite on the same level as my favorites, who we will be getting to shortly. My first honorable mention goes to the Chapel Dweller. I know he's widely considered to be a bit of a fan favorite, and for very good reason. He's probably one of the most kind-hearted characters in the entire game. All he wants to do is help anyone that he can in any way that he's able. And while he's not really able to do much aside from offering a safe place for the still sane Yharnam residents to hunker down, he's still doing a lot more than most of the other characters in this world are, and that has to count for something, right? I honestly felt so bad for him any of the times when things went wrong in the chapel. He would go into these heartbreaking lamentations about how he's never been good enough and has always been told that he'd never amount to anything, and how all he ever wanted to do was try and help. It just really tugs at your heartstrings. Next up on my list is Jura, the retired hunter who guards the residents of Old Yharnam. The reason that he stands out to me is because of where his morals are. Sure, he's kind of a bastard when it comes to first getting past him, and you will die to him repeatedly if you don't know exactly what you're doing, but his heart's in the right place, I feel. He just wants to try and right his wrongs that he did for the Healing Church before the Powder Keg Hunters disbanded, and I feel that that deserves respect. Whenever I go through a playthrough now, I make a point to just mad dash through Old Yharnam and beat Blood-Starved Beast, then take on Dark Beast Parl and go through the back way to Old Yharnam so that I can talk to Jura and promise to spare the beasts that he protects. At this point, it feels morally wrong to do otherwise. Then there's Valter, the master of the League Confederates who you find in the Forbidden Woods. When I first talked to Valter, I didn't really think much of him. He just seemed like a guy you happen to stumble across and can get an oath rune from, and that's pretty much the end of it. And I will admit, his questline was seriously one of the last things that I really learned about in the entire game. But once I learned about it and actually went through with it, I started to really feel something for him. There was this sense of camaraderie, of loyalty that I felt for him, just from going through all of his dialogue and crushing the vermin in front of him. And that was further solidified when I learned that you could actually summon him for a couple of the fights in the DLC. It really made me feel proud to have sworn oath to the League. And while we're talking about the Forbidden Woods, I want to talk about the Suspicious Beggar, otherwise known as the Abhorrent Beast. This character is a little different from the other honorable mentions that I have. He's not listed here because I particularly like him or feel for him. I actually don't find him to be a morally sound character. I mean, God, if you look at him where you first meet him on the rooftop, and you pay particularly close attention to what he's doing, you'll see that he's having a little bit of a snack. A person. But it doesn't even end there. If you look even closer, you'll notice that of the three people sitting in that area, the one that he's eating off of is particularly smaller than the other two. Yeah. The beggar is eating a young boy, and from his size, I would estimate this boy is about 10 or 11 years old. Convince me that that's not fucked up. But anyway, back to the point. The reason that I gave Abhorrent Beast, the Suspicious Beggar, an honorable mention, morals be damned, is because he is one of the most fascinating characters in the game. This is one thing that Brad and I have talked about many times when it comes to the game's lore, mainly discussing how he's the only character who transforms into a beast, but still seems to be fully cognizant of himself even after doing so. I don't know, there's just something different about him, something that seems to be more advanced. It's hard for me to describe, and I don't want to dwell on it too hard, but there's just something that really stands out about him. Granted, I could just be saying this character as another little shout out to Brad, because Abhorrent Beast is Brad's favorite character. But anyway, the final honorable mention goes to Brador, the Church Assassin. And I have to be honest with you, the reason he's an honorable mention is exclusively because of a theory that Brad and I have about him. On the surface, he seems like just a member of the church who will do nothing more than make your journey a complete nuisance by killing you any chance he gets in the fishing hamlet. But I feel there's something about him that goes much, much deeper. Sorry to be vague. Maybe at some point I can actually really talk about this theory in depth if I ever have enough evidence to back it up. But for now, that's all I'm really comfortable saying. Finally, I want to go over my favorite characters. I've decided to go with my top 4 characters in the entire game. Number 4 goes to Eileen the Crow.
Oh, a hunter, are you? And an outsider? What a mess you've been caught up in. And tonight of all nights.
Eileen is one of the earliest characters you can really interact with in the story, and she seems to be friendly enough, albeit maybe a bit jaded in a sense. I enjoyed helping her with Henrik. I felt like I actually did a really good thing stepping in because she needed help, especially seeing as I learned very quickly just how much of a tough old bastard he could be. But then, in the later part of the game, when I found her outside of the Grand Cathedral in a very bad state, I felt really upset. I felt like I had to do something, even though she told me not to get involved. I went into the cathedral and took matters into my own hands. It's widely agreed upon to my knowledge that the Blood Crow of Cainhurst is one of the hardest fights in the entire game, and at that time he was a complete nightmare who I died to repeatedly. Honestly, he's still nothing to scoff at today, but I didn't want to give up. I wanted to avenge my friend who he'd harmed. When he was finally bested, I went back out to Eileen, went through her dialogue, and genuinely felt like I was in mourning. I sat with her for a while just to try to come to terms with what had happened to her. Now, all of this was before I heard the theory that Eileen is actually still alive at the end of her quest line. The main argument that people offer in defense of this theory is that if you leave the area after exhausting her dialogue and come back, her body is not there. Now, as with the rest of the lore in this game, I don't know whether this is or is not the objective truth of the story, but I will say this. I have adopted this theory as a piece of my headcanon. I want for it to be true, so in my mind and in my heart, it is. I believe that Eileen lays there for a while and rests, and once she feels strong enough, she gets up and walks off into the sunset, either to continue her duty of hunting down the blood-addled hunters who have gone mad, or to just retire and finally put the dream behind her. Until somebody can give me undeniable proof that this is not the case and she does die, this is what I'll hold to. I want to believe, damn it. Number 3, which may or may not set people off a bit, is Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower.
A corpse should be left well alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will kill you now.
Much like my view on Jura, I admire that Lady Maria took it upon herself to watch over the patients in the research hall. She clearly gave them a lot of care and compassion, as the patients all seem to have grown very fond of her. And then, of course, there's also the aspect of her leaving one of the flowers that she asks her patients to help her tend to at a makeshift grave for Mother Cause in the fishing hamlet, which I think really brings to light just how much guilt she feels for taking part in the desecration of Cause's body. I just think it's a very beautiful and sad story that she has to tell, and I respect her for trying to do something to make amends for her wrongdoings, even if they weren't really her fault, even if she was only following orders, as any hunter of the church would be expected to do. Number 2, my runner-up to my all-time favorite character in Bloodborne, goes to Gehrman, the first hunter and your earliest friend in the game.
Aha! You must be the new hunter. Welcome to the hunter's dream. This will be your home, for now.
Gehrman breaks my heart a bit. When you first talk to him, he seems to be just a friendly host trying to guide you through what you need to do to complete your obligation to the church. But then, later in the game, if you get very, very lucky, you can hear an extremely rare piece of dialogue from him. This is no hidden gem at this point. I'm pretty sure we all know about this dialogue, but just to recap, he's pretty much begging for Lawrence or Master Willem to find a way to bring an end to the curse and release him from the dream. As it turns out, he's not actually here in the dream by choice. He's here by force. He made a deal with the Moon Presence to try to help bring an end to the curse of Yharnam, and damned himself to be bound to this dream, tentatively forever. He's trapped here, and that to me makes him an absolute tragic character. At this point, it's very rare for me to choose the good ending of the game, because I feel like I'm doing wrong by him in doing so. I tend to go with either the bad or true ending so that I can release him from the dream. Now, there is a reason why I put Gehrman and Maria right next to each other on this list, and that's because I feel like it's only appropriate to keep them together. I will admit, I'm a little bit of a hopeless romantic at heart, and tragic love stories are and always have been a weakness of mine. I feel that Gehrman and Maria are two people who had strong feelings for one another, but unfortunately, things just did not line up for them as they should have. I love the little detail of one photo missing off of the mantle in the hunter's dream, and Lady Maria having, in theory, that exact photo next to her as she sits dead in her chair in the astral clock tower. As if, in her final moments, she chose to remember the time that she and Gehrman had shared above anything else. I also feel that there's a sense of beauty in the fact that Gehrman, when making the doll, made her in Maria's image. And he put so much love and care into creating her that he somehow manifested a part of Maria's soul into her. You can call it creepy if you want to, but I think it's at least a little tiny bit sweet in sentiment. Like I said, I'm always going to be a sucker for tragic love stories and the star-crossed lovers cliché. And whoever came up with the idea to make this part of the game really went above and beyond with it, I feel. But if you were to take all three of these characters, take out all of their best and most endearing traits, put them all together, and then add in the best of every other character in this game to create the perfect magnum opus of a character, I would still not be able to feel as strongly about them, would not be able to adore them anywhere near as much as I do my number one favorite character, not just in Bloodborne, not just in FromSoft games, but in any art form that I've ever had any ties to. His name is Simon the Harrowed, Seeker of Secrets.
You're a hunter with your sanity, aren't you? Must have taken a wrong turn, then, eh? Well, we're more alike than you think. This is the hunter's nightmare, where hunters end up when drunk with blood. You've seen them before. Aimless, wandering hunters slavering like beasts. This is what the poor fools have to look forward to. So, don't be brash. Turn back before it's too late.
When I first came across Simon in the Hunter's Nightmare, I wasn't quite sure what to make of him. He had this air about him that made him seem a little bit sinister, but he was not trying to attack me or anything, so I talked to him. He asked me if I had an interest in nightmares, and seeing as I actually do in real life, I said that nightmares are fascinating. I didn't know that I was initiating his questline, but I went through his dialogue, already really enjoying his voice at that point. I'm a very sound-focused guy, being a musician, and I was very curious what he meant when he said the part of secrets are secrets for a reason. Clearly he knew something, and I wanted to know what exactly that was. So I carried on. I'll admit I didn't get to experience the second encounter with Simon because I didn't know about the church garb dialogue with Ludwig. Then I got to the research hall and pushed the lever to raise up the platforms. He appeared at the lamp and I talked to him again. And this was when I started to feel really connected to him. In the game, of course. He was talking about how corrupted the Healing Church was, and knowing all that I already knew, because this was a few playthroughs in for me, I couldn't help but agree with him. He told me that I had to kill Lady Maria to find the real secret, which obviously I already knew, so I went ahead and did that, having no idea what was to come. I got to the fishing hamlet, and got to the lighthouse hut. There was a different sound when I passed through the door, sort of a groaning or wheezing sound. So I lit the lamp and I looked around to see what was going on, and I genuinely felt my heart stop for a second. I saw Simon laying by the door, clearly wounded. Now, of course, as they tend to do, the whale shark had followed me, so I held back for a minute and waited for him to fuck off. But once he was gone, I walked up to Simon and his dialogue began. I had never in my life been as affected by a character's dialogue in any sort of media. I listened to what he had to say, and then it got to the last few lines of his story.
So our forefathers sinned. We hunters cannot bear their weight forever. It isn't fair. It just isn't fair.
Look, I consider myself to be an honest man, and I'm comfortable enough with my masculinity to admit this. I cried. And I cried a lot. Those lines hit me like a freight train. Then he let out his final breath. Simon died, and at that moment I felt like a part of me died too. I had gone through character quest lines by that point that I found sad, even heartbreaking to an extent, but none of them, not a single one, compared to this one for me. I was fucking distraught. I felt like it was all my fault, like I could have done something more to save him, but I didn't, and I felt awful. The guilt made me feel like it was my fault he died, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't want to continue on the story at that point. I wanted to let my character sit there and die with him. Then something shifted, and I hated every other character in the game. Was it rational? Absolutely not. Not at all. But at that moment, I did not care. I hated Brador. I hated Lawrence. I hated Maria, Mikolash, the Living Failures, Orphan, Gehrman, Gilbert. I hated the fucking doll at that moment in time. Not a single character in the game was safe from me at that time. I was out for blood. I was sad. I was hurt. I was angry. And I was going to make sure that it was everyone else's fucking problem. I went on a little bit of a killing spree for a while, but it didn't last very long. Eventually, I just turned the game off. I was too depressed to even enjoy the game at that point. I was a broken man that night. I'm going to be honest, I'm not even 100% sure why his death affected me as much as it did. If I were to place a guess, maybe it has something to do with the fact that he seems to be one of the only characters in the game who is really trying to bring an end to the curse. Other characters, particularly the ones who are still protagonistic, either do a small something to try and make up for their wrongdoings, or do pretty much fuck all, really. Of course, I don't mean any disrespect in saying that. I do still think it's noble that they're doing anything whatsoever. But I feel that Simon is one of the only ones, if not the only one, who is really truly putting forth an effort to actually bring an end to it all. He seems to at least have an inkling of hope left, and that's kind of refreshing to see in such a bleak story. Which is funny coming from a chronic cynic like me. Either way, obviously I got past his death eventually, though I wasn't able to play the game for a few days after seeing this for the first time. And I do still go through his quest line as much as it still breaks my heart. And I won't lie to you, I still tear up when I get to the end of his story. I don't think I'll ever reach a point where it doesn't upset me, at least a little bit. So I mentioned a little while ago that there was one lore theory that Brad and I had discussed that I've really grown fond of to the point where it is one of the main points of my headcanon, whether it actually holds water or not. I still don't want to go into too much detail on it. This video is already a lot longer than I ever would have thought it could be. but I just want to put this idea out there at least a little bit because I haven't seen anyone else ask this question at all. Why does Simon have the key to Brador's cell? Simon's on the search for the source of the nightmare, not the old church assassin. Brador's cell isn't even in the fishing hamlet, which Simon himself says is the true secret and claims that it feeds the hunter's nightmare. So if Brador doesn't really have anything to do with the nightmare itself, then why does Simon have his cell key? So I specifically tried my hardest throughout this entire endeavor, both part 1 and this current part, to stay on track and not stray too far off topic. There is a specific reason for that. I wanted to save my one allowed side rant for one subject in particular. I want to take a moment to really appreciate Grant Gillespie. Grant Gillespie is the voice actor not only for Simon, but also for Yamamura,
Shrouded by night but with steady stride, coloured by blood but always clear of mind, proud hunter of the church. Beasts are a curse, and a curse is a shackle. Only ye are the true blades of the church.
and one of the research hall patients.
Has anyone, seen my eyes? I'm afraid I've dropped them in a puddle. Everything is pale now.
I feel that he has put so much love and passion into the parts that he's played, and he really brought them all to life, especially Simon. The emotion that he put into some of Simon's dialogue really makes it hit so much harder, at least for me. And I feel like it's honestly a talent that is far too often overlooked, or at absolute least undervalued and underappreciated. I'll admit, I had not heard of Mr. Gillespie before I played Bloodborne. In fact, I didn't really look into anything else that he's done until pretty recently. I want to say late 2024. I was doing some deep diving into Simon's character and trying to learn more lore about him, and I learned that Mr. Gillespie was his voice actor. So curiosity got the better of me, and I started to do some research about him as well. And I'm so glad that I did. I really wish I had done so sooner. I learned that Grant Gillespie is not only a voice actor, he's also a film actor, a stage performer, and a writer. He is truly a man of many talents. I learned about his first novel that he published, titled The Cuckoo Boy, and I decided to get myself a copy shipped all the way from the UK. I'm not normally much of a reader. Dyslexia is a bitch. But I genuinely could not stop reading this book until I got to the end of it. I could not put it down. I tried to, but I couldn't. This book is 340 pages long, and it took me around 32 hours to get through, give or take. This is something that is completely unheard of for me. The book is that good. Then, after that, I learned that he wrote and starred in a short film called Just Do It, which is listed as a dark comedy, and let me just say, they got the dark part right for sure. The story is about Mark Constantine, an aspiring novelist who is working on writing his first book. But everyone around him keeps saying that he's doing the wrong thing. What he should be doing instead is focusing on his social media presence. I don't want to spoil anything in the story. It is a fantastic short film, clocking in at right around 13 minutes long. I'm going to leave a link to the video in the description, and I encourage everybody to go and watch it. And he's done so many other things as well. Everything that I've seen that he's been in has just been amazing. I think that Mr. Gillespie deserves all of the support in the world. I have thoroughly enjoyed everything of his that I've seen. Not that this will happen, but Mr. Gillespie, if you're somehow watching this, I just want you to know that I'm a big fan of your work, and I look forward to seeing whatever else you put out there. I think you're truly brilliant and talented. Please keep up the amazing work. Finally, I want to make a few more notes about Simon and how impactful he as a character was to me. My username has not always been HarrowedHunter92. I don't even remember what it was before, it's been quite a while, but I actually changed my username in honor of Simon. My favorite attire set in the game is the Harrowed set. It's what I almost always wear, not just because it's truly one of the best sets in the game with some of the best defenses, but because it's his set. And his story affected me so much that I wrote a song for him. The song that plays at the end of all my videos. Yes, I wrote that, and it's for him. I never would have imagined that I could write a song for a person who doesn't even exist, but here we are. But that has to show something, right? I mean, if that doesn't tell you just how much he as a character means to me, then I don't know what will. I honestly don't think that I'll ever find another character in a game, or any other media for that matter, that I will feel as invested in, feel this much love for, as I do for Simon. I don't think he can be topped for me, and to be completely honest with you, I don't want him to be. Simon is always going to have a very special place in my heart, and he will always be my #1 favorite character. So, with all of that being said, where does that leave me now? The most obvious answer is that I'm still very active with the game. I'm making my Chalice Dive videos when I'm able to, and I'm hoping that as other aspects of my life reach more stable footing, maybe I can start making more content, both with Chalice Dives and other aspects of the game as well. Making my videos has honestly become one of my favorite hobbies to do. It brings me a lot of joy, and I really do wish that I could do more with them. I'm also playing the game a lot with friends, especially Brad when he's feeling up to it. And I'm always open to finding more people to party up with and chat and play wherever in the game anyone wants to go. Main game, DLC, dungeons, whatever. Throughout Return to Yharnam 2025, I've been back on Reddit looking for people to help. And maybe, if the community stays active even after the 2-week celebration that's going on, I might stay active on there still. At this point, between Chalice Diving, cooperative play, and just going through my own playthroughs, I've gone well past 2,600 hours clocked in the game. I have a fun personal goal to reach at least 3,000 hours by the end of this year, which I'm pretty sure will be surpassed, but I don't want to sound too cocky on that. And on top of that, I'm also working, albeit slowly, on a little passion project of mine. I'm making my own unofficial player's guide through the game, putting together anything and everything that I've learned about the game throughout the years. So far, I'm not even halfway through the sections that I have in mind. I actually think I'm closer to a quarter of the way through. And I'm sure that as I go on, I'll think of even more things to put in the book. I'm not sure if this guide will ever actually get finished, or if I could even do anything with it if it were to get finished. But for now, that's all up in the air anyway. For the time being, it's just a little extra thing I can work on when I have the time and energy for it. I also intend, when I have the money for it, to get a few tattoos related to the game. I don't have any yet. Sadly, I wish I did, but there are a few that I definitely want to get. The first one, I'm pretty sure, is going to be the Hunter and Impurity runes, probably on my upper arm right around here. I also at some point want to get a tattoo of Simon, and then maybe a tattoo with my main weapon arrangement, the saw spear, the bow blade, and the Evelyn. But again, that's all up in the air. But one of the main things that I've been doing is watching a lot of YouTube videos about Bloodborne, primarily about cut content and behind-the-scenes details like the alpha version of the game. There are several channels out there who make phenomenal content about all different aspects of the game, and I honestly cannot get enough of it. There's a lot of time that I'll end up watching them throughout the night when I can't sleep, and sometimes, if I'm lucky, I'll actually fall asleep to them. They'll help lull me to sleep. Not because I get bored of them or anything, but because they soothe me, they help me relax. And that leads me to my final point. Bloodborne for me is not just a game that I can play. It's so much more than that. It has become almost a kind of relationship to me, a sense of security and comfort that nothing else really comes close to. It might sound crazy, but I turn to this game when I'm stressed out. This game is more than anything else to me at this point, my personal escape. It gives me a place to go when the real world that I'm stuck in just doesn't make sense anymore or is too much for me to handle. I don't want to go into too much personal detail about this, but let's just say that I'm a bit of a neurodivergent person, and life gets very overwhelming for me very quickly. When that happens and it gets to be just too much, I turn on the game and get lost in it all over again. It might not be considered the best coping mechanism, though it's definitely not the worst either, but it has helped me through some really tough times in my life when nothing else was able to, and that has to count for something. To tell you the truth, if someone were to come up to me with a magic wand or a spell book, and they told me that they could grant me access to any other place, real or fictional, I wouldn't even need to think about it. I would just ask them to send me to Yharnam. And once I got there, to tell you the truth, I don't know if I would ever want to come back. I've grown to love that world so much. I feel like I belong there, and I want to stay there and never ever leave. Yharnam feels like home to me at this point. I have so many people who I want to give my undying gratitude to for all of this. Firstly, everyone from FromSoftware who worked on this game. I'm talking sound design, visual design, world design, the people who came up with the weapons, the people who came up with the story, the combat styles, the characters, all of the voice actors. Hell, I want to thank the janitorial staff that worked at the office. And, of course, the mastermind behind all of it, Miyazaki. You are all amazing, and you don't get nearly enough appreciation, I feel, and I will never stop singing you praises. I'm not trying to make a meme reference here, but seriously, thank you for changing my life. I also want to thank all of the YouTubers who I've watched, and there are so many to list here. For lore-related content, there's VadiVidya, there's Fungo, and the Brothers Code, especially them in particular. The Brothers Code made a fantastic video breaking down one of the most feasible deep dives into the story's lore that I've ever seen. I'm going to post a link to that video in the description as well. Then there's Muge, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, please excuse me, for the videos with all the characters' dialogue, including cut dialogue. I've genuinely learned a lot of the characters' cut dialogue from your videos specifically, so thank you so much for that. Then there's Zox the Gamer, another channel I want to thank for all the walkthroughs for finding the lost and uncanny weapon variants and Tier 3 runes in the Chalice dungeons. I cannot even place a guess of how many times I've turned to your videos in particular to find things that I was missing in the game. I cannot thank you enough. You are doing the important work. I also want to thank Phobia for the videos you made on glitches and ways to break the game, another huge fascination of mine. Then there's Moros Nix, there's The Garden of Eyes, X-Trin, who I suspect is Trinspector on PSN, one of the main contributors to various Chalice glyphs that I use all the time. Then there's Omega Fantasy, otherwise known as Sanadesk K, Foxy Hooligans, Zuli the Witch, and quite possibly my most watched channel, Lance McDonald, for all the more behind-the-scenes aspects, like data mining and exploring the cut content. You guys have given me, I can't even tell you how many hours of enjoyment with your videos. There's probably so many people out there who I just can't think of right now or haven't stumbled across yet, and I'm sorry about that, but anyone who has made any sort of Bloodborne content on YouTube, just know that I appreciate you regardless. Then there's the subreddits that I've been a part of. r/Bloodborne has given me a lot of laughs with the memes posted there, and a lot of very interesting conversations with other players about just various things. Then r/Tomb Prospectors has given me so much information about the chalice diving and all the possibilities that are there, as well as hours upon hours of interesting reading material and things to look at on the Bloodborne Wiki website. And of course, as I mentioned in my last video, r/Hunter's Bell, which led me to meeting some truly amazing people. And speaking of amazing people, I want to give thanks to all the people I've played this game with throughout the years. There's my spouse Ava and my friend Tay, who I play the game with in person. Then there's Tyler, there's Rex, there's Seth, and there's, of course, Brad, who I play with online. And there's so many other people who I've played with online as well, but have sadly lost touch with. I love playing with all of you, and I'm so grateful to have met each and every one of you. And of course, I want to thank everyone who watches my videos. Like I said before, this is one of the most fun things that I can really do at this point, and it warms my heart for anybody to watch and hopefully get some sort of enjoyment out of them, as ridiculous as I'm sure I can come across sometimes. So, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And with that, I only have one thing left to say. Happy 10-year anniversary, Bloodborne. You will always be my favorite game of all time. May the hunt continue for years to come. Wow. If you're still watching this video, thank you so much for sticking with me through this. I know this was a lot to sit through. Believe me, it was a lot to do on my end too, and I really appreciate you giving me your time and just letting me gush over Bloodborne. I don't foresee videos like these becoming too much of a regular occurrence. This was really a lot for me to take on, which in the end, that's my own fault, but I really felt compelled to make this and share my love on the 10-year anniversary of the game. I do feel that I personally tend to work a little bit better with my usual format, but there might be more videos like these somewhere along the way. I'm just not sure at this time, and I don't want to make any false promises. I would love to hear in the comments your own story of your experience with Bloodborne and what you like about the game. It always feels great to know that there are other people who love the game as much as I do. There are definitely going to be more chalice diving videos coming along the way too. I still can't quite run on a schedule at this time, but there will be some coming out. If you're interested, please just keep an eye out for those. Thank you again for watching. I hope you're having a good day or night, whatever time it is where you are, and I will see you next time. Bye.